Thank you for holding. Parties will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, you can press star 1 to ask a question. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect. I'd like to introduce your first speaker, Mr. Leland Milstein.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the call today for our Third Thursday webcast. The Third Thursday webcast series is a monthly webcast held at the lunch hour. The trainings leverage local successes by amplifying to a larger audience two model organizations' methods, materials, and approaches. Sessions are planned to last no more than 1 hour with two presenters speaking on the same topic from slightly different perspectives. Today, that topic is tree stock. This session is approved by the ISA for 1 CEU hour and by SAS for 1 CFE Category 1. If you have not already given me your certification number, please email me after this session. My email address is leland, Leland, @actrees.org. Alternatively, also, most landscape architecture boards require only a certificate of completion, which I can provide to members who request that. So let me know about that as well. This is a program of the Alliance for Community Trees. Please consider joining if you are not a member, but we are glad you're here and taking part in our webcast today. We want to thank our sponsors, the Home Depot Foundation, and also the U.S. Forest Service for making this possible. Today's topic is Urban Landscaping Part 2, Tree Stock, following up on last month's Part 1 landscaping session on bare root trees. Millions of dollars are spent each year designing, implementing, and maintaining urban landscapes. Urban landscaping presents a variety of unique challenges. There's, of course, the physiological problem of growing plants in urban environments. There's also the challenge of working with municipalities to assess and manage their green infrastructure, to develop technologies appropriate for city use, and to care for the environment through not just fieldwork, but also publications, websites, face-to-face meetings, and conferences. Despite these challenges, the quality of life benefits of proper urban landscaping are dramatic. Problems can be avoided or reduced by utilizing sustainable landscape practices. By using best management practices, cities and towns can transform their urban forests into rainwater mitigation assets and enable large tree growth. Tree stock selection goes a long way towards the long-term health and success of urban trees. Whether balled and burlap, containerized, or bare root, it's the roots that suffer when trees are transplanted. To tell us more about tree stock and the challenges that we face with the urban forest, today we have Jim Urban and Sue Probart. Jim is going to lead off today. He specializes in the design of trees and soils in urban spaces. He has written and lectured extensively on the subject of urban tree planting and has been responsible for the introduction of many innovations, including most of the current standards relating to urban tree planting. He was instrumental in the development of structural cells and structural planting soils for use under sidewalk pavements, micro-root paths, and micro-soil trench techniques. Jim is credited with helping to reawaken the profession of landscape architecture to the skills required to successfully plant trees in difficult urban soils. In 2007, he was awarded the ASLA Medal of Excellence for his work with urban trees and soils. Thanks for being with us today, Jim.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to begin here, and Leland, I've got this website open, but it's just got the kind of the cover page on it. Is there something that I can do to run the thing, or should I just tell you to? Oh, wait. Now I see something happening here, maybe.
We're about to bring up your slideshow.
Okay. There we go. And then to go forward,
There's arrows at the bottom.
So the up arrow, which just says previous page, that says 18. That's the last slide. Actually, that's 18 of 18, so we need to get back to this. There we go, slide number 1. That looks good. Great. Okay.
All right, take it away, Jim.
All right. So as most of you may know, I've been mostly focused in on this trees need dirt idea, that the problem with most urban trees is lack of soil or lack of usable soil. And I still firmly believe that that's a critical issue. But somewhere around 5 years ago, in talking with a number of arborists around the country and trying to fit observations together with what I was seeing and what other people were seeing, it was very clear that a reason a lot of small trees didn't mature or maybe reached a certain size and then died quite suddenly may actually be the quality of the nursery stock as much as the lack of soil. And maybe the two of those working hand in hand. But I've seen lots of trees that have failed even when they have what would appear to be generous amounts of soil. And I'm just going to quickly, I don't know how much of the audience is fully versed in how a tree grows, but assuming that you are, but Tom Perry's famous wine glass on a dinner plate. And I always like this analogy because if you study that wine glass, you'll see that the designer of the glass, just as the glass stem reaches the base of the glass, it actually expands out and widens a little bit, and that's because that's the weakest point in the whole glass structure. And that little joint where the wine glass gets a little wider as it joins its base is also must happen in a tree. And I once bought a set of wine glasses that didn't have this feature, and they were all broken within a couple of years. And it's this feature that I think we are really harming with our nursery stock. Of course, we do need to provide the right soil volume. And, we see these avenues of wide trees, and we don't realize that it was the soil volume that allows that set of trees in this particular image to grow well, while the same species of tree on a street that didn't quite have those really generous boulevards often don't achieve these magnificent rows of trees that we see in the image. And I've even found that on really well-maintained projects, or even my own project, this Law Officers Memorial at the bottom, that even slight differences in soil volume will create differences, fairly dramatic differences, fairly quickly in the way that the tree actually grows. And I don't think that nursery stock was a factor in any of these particular images. Even something as simple as moving the tree away from the curb line, so that on the right-hand side you see a row of trees that were planted between the curb and the walkway, and another set, and these two pictures are taken literally just turning the camera a little bit to get a different perspective on the different street. Moving it behind the sidewalk made a huge difference. These trees were all planted at the same time, same nursery stock, so I don't think it's nursery stock is what's happening there. I've been preaching for a long time to plant the easy places first, to get those trees in places where we have the easiest amounts of soil volume. And I've also been working on trying to figure out how to get some of that soil volume under the pavement. And worked on structural soils for a long time until I gave up on that idea because there just wasn't any real soil in the material, and we're not seeing good results with structural soils. And then have been working for the last 5 years, or maybe even longer. I started this in 2003, working on this concept called structural cells, which essentially is a box that we fill with soil, and we can provide really enormous soil volumes for trees right in the urban environment. And while this is an expensive idea, considering that these trees, when they mature, might be worth $30,000 a pop, spending $10,000 a tree to get them planted right, is probably a reasonable idea in a downtown environment. You can also use the structural cells to increase the soil volume a little bit by using just a few of them if you don't have the money or the need to provide really, really large soil volumes. But the bottom line is that we're really trying to grow big trees. And I think that big trees and diversity of species is critical to the success of cities. And big trees means you're going to have these very, very large trunk flares in most part of the country, and we're planting, even in places like Arizona, we plant species of trees, California, that they get very, very large trunk flares, particularly in California. And so we have to accommodate that, both in the design and also the nursery stock has got to be able to allow that to take place. So when we look at the nursery stock, we in the country, we basically, most of the country has a choice between the B&B stock and the containers. Out west, we're using more box trees. Out east, we hardly have any box trees. I've always considered the box tree and the container to be relatively the same, although I think maybe the box, for some reasons, may be a little bit better than the container. And the B&B, as long as it never went in a nursery pot, is, in my opinion, the best alternative. But if it was in a container at some point during its propagation period, may not be any better than a container tree. So when we look at the B&B trees and we started tearing these balls apart and looking at them, we found that a very large amount of time there was a lot of soil above the root structure of the tree, and that within this softer soil above, adventitious roots began to grow, and those became the girdling roots that were limiting to the tree. So in 2005, the American Nursery and Landscape Association adopted this standard that we were not allowed to have any more than 3 inches of soil on top of the main structural roots, measured 4 inches away from the trunk. And I think that's too much soil. I would like it to be 1 inch, but that's the best we could get from the nursery industry. But when we start seeing these trees planted too deep, we begin to see rots developing down at the trunk. We see girdling roots and trees that either fail fairly quickly, an example here on the thing, or they may not fail for many, many years. The container trees seem to be the worst. They're almost always in containers. And the small container, the original container, produces these girdling roots, and at the bottom of that key in the drawing you can see, or in the image, you can see a girdling root that's going around. The upper roots that you see are actually not the trunk flare, but are adventitious roots that grew out in the container, have grown to a large enough size to actually begin to become structural roots. And this tree, frankly, may grow over the top of that girdling root, but there are other girdling roots in the image that could become a problem later. We end up with this very, very tight, dense mass of roots right at the base of the tree, where we really don't want to have anything but just a few roots. So I started sawing these containers in half. I've sawn about 15 now in different nurseries around the country, and they generally all look like this, where the yellow line represents the original 1-gallon nursery pot, and there are about 10 or 12 girdling roots completely enveloping the base of that tree. The orange line is the second container, and there were another set of girdling roots around there. And then the green line on the left-hand image is the girdling, the plant as it appeared when we pulled it out of the pot. And I just see this time and time again. Ed Gilman says that there is no such thing as a container that will not produce these girdling roots if you leave it in too long. And Carl Whitcomb, when I had dinner with him, said that too long is about 1.5 months to 3 months, depending on species. So it's essentially an unfixable proposition. I'm going to end with this new idea, which is, I think the problem that we have is the warranty. The warranty only requires that the nurseries and the designers and the contractors keep that tree alive for 1 to 2 years. Then they're done with it, and they never go back. And the arborists and the tree managers receive that tree on the other side of the warranty wall. If problems develop in year 5 or 6 or 10 or 20, they have no way to even communicate back to the nurseries, the designers, the contractors, who even inform them that there's a problem, much less get any payment or restitution for this defective tree that was presented to them. So I would suggest that we get rid of the warranty, that we work between the nurseries, designers, contractors, and arborists, tree managers to get good quality trees, spend all of our money and effort to get good quality trees that are planted correctly, and forget the warranty, because right now it's being used as a crutch. So that ends my presentation. And where do we go? We go into questions, Leland?
Yep, what we're going to do next is open this up for questions. The operator will put people in queue for questions. You can also feel free, if you'd rather type a question to me on the computer, you can do that through the live meeting, and I will type in with those as well. While people are getting into the queue with questions, I want to start off with one of my own. I know one of the challenges of planting trees in cities especially is the damage that can be caused to sidewalks. And so I'm wondering, Jim, how popular or where your technology for the cells under the pavement has been used a lot, if there are any cities that are taking advantage of this technology.
Okay. Well, in that image that I showed with just a few cells around the tree, what those cells are primarily doing is making the tree planting hole much larger. And we know that the further you get away from, you get the where the root interfaces with a sidewalk, the rate of sidewalk failure goes down. And so remember that underneath the deck that supports the cell, there is an airspace. And see if we can get back to that image. So you see the in here in the upper right, left-hand corner where the cell decks are on top of the cell. There's actually an airspace under there. Plus the soil in the cell is fairly soft. It's compacted just to optimum growing levels. So instead of getting a lot of roots on the surface, we're getting roots that are looking more like they're growing in a nursery, and there's also this airspace above. So that the roots that are growing out that first critical zone of rapid taper roots are interfacing with the cells before it has to grow out into the more compacted soil that would be around the cell. There are, I don't know that there's any cities that have adopted this as a standard for this particular application, although the city of Toronto has just recently put silver cells into their standard, and the city of New York is also considering it. But there are lots of applications where I've seen using these smaller amounts of cells to bridge over these kinds of things. And I'm trying to think of some specific examples. I know that Abbotsford, Canada, has installed some pilot projects. I'm pretty sure that there are some in Seattle and Portland. For some reason, we get a lot in the Pacific Northwest. And trying to think of some smaller applications. In Nashville, I think Nashville, Tennessee, is got a project, but I don't think it's built yet. The technology is actually quite new, so it takes about 2 to 3 years from the time we issued it in 2005 before we had any of it really in the ground in any substantial amounts.
Okay, great.
Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. I'd like to ask the operator if there are any, to open the lines, and if there are any questions in queue.
If you'd like to ask a question from the phones, press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name. To withdraw your question, press *2. Once again, it's *1 to ask a question. Please stand by for the first question.
Okay. And while they're gathering up in queue, I'm going to ask one of the questions online. One from Jessica is, Jim, she's wondering about your feelings about design that utilizes gratings surrounding tree trunks in street trees and urban landscapes.
Okay, the infamous tree grate. I would say that after soil volume, I think that tree grates are probably the most egregious thing that we do to trees in the city. They do nothing to support the tree. There is no real need to keep compaction out of that small space. Those are just buttress roots, and they can take a fair amount of compaction. What they do is make sure that the hole is as small as it can possibly be. They're very inflexible in their design. They're quite expensive. Even the cheap ones are $1,000 installed, and I've seen them as high as $15,000 and $20,000 a pop for the expensive ones. And all of that money could be spent under the ground and put into making the soil better, and also if you don't use a grate, it allows you to make the hole even slightly bigger. May be important. Even a few inches might net you out a lot more opportunities in a very intense environment. So I'm strongly opposed to the use of tree grates in any application. I don't think they're really necessary.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions in queue?
Yes, the first question is from Greg Brown.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. My question is, if you're saying that in the end all pots turn out circling roots, girdling roots, would you go so far as to specify field-grown trees if you're going to put them in only?
Yes, my attitude at this point is that there is no tree that I've ever seen that comes in a pot that I would plant out of the pot. And so I do not allow container plants on my projects, and would strongly recommend people not to allow container trees. Now, it is possible with great effort to fix some of those problems. You can go in and bare root the trees using air spades, water, your fingers, your hands, and I've done this. You can pull out all of those girdling roots. There may, although I've never actually killed a tree doing this, I would imagine that I could, but I'd much rather kill the tree on the day of planting than to have it die 4 or 5 years later, or even worse, 20 years later. But the effort to do this takes enormous amounts of time, 10 to 20 minutes per tree. And so but if I had to use a container tree as my only option, I would definitely have to bare root it at the planting site just before I was going to plant it.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions in queue?
Yes, the next question is from Don Kissinger.
Hello, I'm wondering where these tree cells can be purchased or seen online to get more information, and is it something they can get throughout the nation?
Yes, the cells, they're called Silva cells, are marketed by a company called Deep Root, and you can access that online at www.deeproot.com, and then go to a Silva cell link, and that will give you all the information that you need for an introduction. And then the cells were specifically designed to be manufactured in one place and be easily shipped to any place in the world. We actually have a project in Dubai we're working on, and because they're very lightweight. And then you fill them with the native soil. I believe a lot of times you can use the soil that comes out of the hole,
Okay.
Even in an urban area, by adding a little compost to it.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to ask a question here from the web, from Lance Schamberg. He's wondering what practices you would recommend municipalities employ in order to receive good quality trees.
I think the most critical thing, one, is to either only allow field-grown trees, and that means they've been field-grown for their entire life, or bare root. And I think that ultimately the industry is going to move toward bare root for a whole bunch of reasons. It was the way almost every tree was planted prior to World War II. We were very successful with that technique, and I think we need to go back and learn that the hydrogel technology and air spade technology makes this actually easier. But if you, the other critical thing that municipalities are missing, and most people are missing, is someone actually has to go to the growing nursery and tag the tree. It's the only way you can assure quality control. Somebody has to look down on the ground and find the roots, and I actually bring a little shovel with me. I used to be a proponent of using surveyor chain pins, but I'm finding them too limiting. I'm actually bringing little hand trowels and shovels. And what I'll do if I'm tagging out of a row, I might excavate 2 or 3 randomly selected trees out of that row and excavate around the collar and see what the collar looks like. If there are any remedial problems that need to be resolved, like there's too much soil or there's girdling roots, I'll then require that the nurseryman do that for every tree, but I don't have to dig them all up. I just need to require that he do them and write the requirements. The nursery stock standards don't allow circling roots, so you're not asking for anything that is out of the ordinary. It's just we never check. And then, of course, you need to check the upper part of the tree for codominant leaders and other things that we often look for. But none of that can happen at the job site or when the truck rolls up with the trees on it. By that time, it's too late to make the remedial actions. So you've got to get out to the nursery, and someone has to look at those trees. It's probably the cheapest thing you could spend money on in the whole process is to send a reasonably competent person to the nursery.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions in queue?
There are no further questions from the phones.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask another one here from the web. Lisa Hare is wondering if you've seen any good solutions for managing buried utilities around trees.
Well, for managing new utilities, it's a matter of trying to essentially declare that you know a bit more than everybody else and win the arguments and push the utilities down or to the side or however you can negotiate the space between the tree and its rooting needs and the utilities. And there's an awful lot of misinformation about tree roots and utilities. The idea that, for example, the tree can't be any more than 5 or 8 or 10 feet away from the utility is kind of dumb, because if you want to say, I want to make sure this root never gets there, it's got to be about 50 feet, and we wouldn't have any trees at all. But essentially, it's about making the space for both of those. Let's see. The city of Toronto is heading in the direction of declaring trees and their root systems as simply another utility, so that they have to negotiate together so they have a seat at the table as a utility negotiator, not as a tree negotiator. Now, when you're dealing with trees and existing trees and utilities, then you're really into a fairly large tree preservation project, and each one is different, and you have to deal with it that way.
Okay. Are there any questions in queue?
Yes, that's another question from Don Kissinger.
Hello, quick question. What would you use as a minimum terrace or boulevard width between a curb and a sidewalk for trees such as oaks, hackberries, lindens, elms, that type of thing, in a residential setting?
Okay. Let's see. If I'm building the sidewalk at the same time, I'm going to build some kind of bridge for those roots to get out. If I can, even a 10-foot wide boulevard will eventually, the tree will tear up the sidewalk in most soil conditions. But I'd make it as wide as I could. If I've got the ability to put bridging, then I only really need to get the trunk flare in there, and maybe I can get away with 5 feet or thereabouts. 4 feet starting to get pretty narrow.
Okay.
If I don't have the bridging, then I've got to really make it wide. And as I say, 10 feet. I've seen sidewalks ripped up with 10-foot wide medians. The tree, even in a 3-foot wide median, the tree will do fine. It's not the problem with the tree; it's the problem with all the other stuff that it's bumping up against.
So when you say bridging, do you mean a soil area to go across where the sidewalk is, or an area for the roots to expand?
Right in the area of the sidewalk, you're going to need to have some way for those roots are going to go through there.
Correct.
And so if you give them a pathway, either whether it's silva cells or structural soil or root paths or something, you're going to get those roots to grow through there. The more, I think you'll probably be more successful with silva cells than root paths, for example, but you're going to pay more money for that. Probably in the long run, that it'll all pay for itself.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one other question from the web. Chris Soloway is wondering if there are any particular special considerations when using pervious pavement on top of structural cells.
The only special condition is that the cell's design requires a certain strength of the pavement, and as the paving gets weaker, for example, if you're using a small module of a precast concrete paver that's, say, a 4x8, you're going to have to put down a little bit more subgrade material to give the pavement adequate strength. My favorite paver, I believe, right now that I've seen is the pervious concrete, because it's pretty strong and extremely porous. And I think that we're going to be seeing more of that material used. But it does have a certain aesthetic factor that we haven't warmed up to yet. But if we like modern art, we probably could eventually like pervious concrete.
All right, and I've got one last question. I'm wondering how you feel about grow bags. Do they function differently or the same as containers?
I think that if the grow bag is removed, probably, and I don't have any experience with them all because they're not used. I never see them in my market for some reason, in Mid-Atlantic, East Coast. That they might not be that bad, but you've got to. But the problem is that a lot of times they get left on, and that's an absolute disaster. But also, was the tree at one point in a container? Which is the other issue that we even have with B&B stock, is that we're now seeing more and more that for example, Schmidt out in Oregon is now actually producing up to 10,000 trees a year in containers. And they're planning on expanding that. Getting a tree that's never been in a container is going to be harder and harder.
All right, great. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. For those of you who still have questions, I'm sure Jim would be happy to answer them. You can also email them to me, and I will get them answered and send them back to you. Thanks, Jim, for your presentation. We're going to move on now to Sue Probart, who's the Executive Director of Tree New Mexico. Sue Probart is one of the founding members, actually, of Tree New Mexico and has served as the director there since 1990. She has guided this community-based nonprofit on a shoestring budget into a nationally recognized environmental organization with outreach including 130 communities in New Mexico and Arizona, 22 Native American tribes, national and state forests and parks, and 40 protected riparian areas. Among the boards she has served on are the National Urban and Community Advisory Council, Alliance for Community Trees, New Mexico Tree Planting Advisory Committee, Holistic Management International, and the Albuquerque Energy Council. Sue also helped Navajo agencies and government officials establish Navajo Nation Arbor Day and assisted other communities in earning their Tree City USA designations. Thanks for being with us today, Sue.
Thank you, Leland. Hello, everyone. First slide, please. Jim gave you everything you probably ever needed to know about street tree planting, parks, and large urban trees. So from New Mexico, we do a lot of things very differently. The traditional stuff that Jim talked about is what we do here on working with street departments and with parks departments throughout New Mexico. But we also have a lot of non-traditional, what I would consider non-traditional tree planting efforts. And I wanted to go over those a little bit with you today. One is Albuquerque is really, really blessed by having the Rio Grande River run through town, and in the heart of our urban forest is 2,500 acres of a cottonwood willow gallery. And on this first slide, you can see when Jim was talking about tree roots, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see our mayor actually and some volunteers planting in one of our burn sites down in the bosque. We call it, we name it it's the Spanish word for river forest, is the bosque. And he's planting a cottonwood pole there that has absolutely no roots. And the method for growing that is you drill down till you hit the water table, usually somewhere between 4 and 6 feet. And once the base of that stem hits the capillary fringe there, then you backfill it, and you end up with an instant forest. And we can plant 200 to 300 trees in a site in a day with a couple of different volunteer groups, usually 10 to 20 volunteers. Then in the middle, you will see one of our big burn sites. These are in the catastrophic fires, the Crown Fires of 2001. I don't have a recent picture of that, but I can provide that for you, where we planted about 3,000 trees in that area now that are ranging between 6 and 8 feet. And then in the left-hand corner, you'll see something that is new technology. These are riparian middle story and understory trees and shrubs that are grown in what is called a long pot. These are 30 to 36-inch containers that force the tree roots to grow down rather than out in a normal container. As you can see, barely see in there, they have side slits. We do the same drilling method that you do for the pole trees. These do have roots, though, but you do need to also hit the capillary fringe and backfill. If we don't hit the capillary fringe on some of the trees, you can actually plant them over the root flare by a foot or two to make sure you're getting that root into water, and the tree and shrub will actually grow out perfectly fine that way. But it is getting into the capillary fringe that makes that a successful planting. On the poles and the long pots, as shown here, we're getting anywhere between a 95 and a 99% survival rate on these over a 5-year period. So our dollars are extremely well spent. On a 10-foot cottonwood tree, for instance, in pole form, that tree costs us about $25 installed. And so it definitely is a very big dollar savings for us to be able to plant this way. The long pot trees as well cost about $25. They're more labor intensive, and they take a little bit longer to grow, even though they're smaller trees. So that gives you an overview, a little bit of what we do in riparian areas, along with some of maybe the more traditional ways to do riparian in the East. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about tree giveaways in the community. They can be a very positive thing, and they have sort of a bad reputation, depending on how you do them. We started doing them in conjunction with Mayor Chavez here in Albuquerque and we're doing about 5,000 trees in spring and about another 5,000 in fall. The ones that you see here are in 10-inch bullets. They're all rooted. We do not give away any bare root trees. We know that from what Jim is telling us and what we know as well, that bare root trees do better. The problem is making sure that the roots are properly handled when people come to pick them up. And most often they get dried out. They don't plant them properly or in time. And so we have much better success rate in our smaller trees. The fall trees that we give away are actually in about a 1-gallon container, but they're a square container. And they're, where we get this stock is from our state forestry seedling program. As you can see, the number of people here on both of the photos. The tree giveaway on this one started at 10 o'clock in the morning. We had people lined up around the park to get trees, and we serviced more than 800 families during this tree giveaway and 5,000 trees. When we do it, we give away also the printed material, which includes planting instructions, handling instructions, and species information along with maintenance. We started a program here that will be on our website, both the cities and Tree New Mexico's very shortly. We're getting on average about somewhere between 30 and 50% survivability rate after 2 years with giving away these to local residences. And what we're going to start now is a program where people can send us photos and growth rates and whatever and success stories of their trees. We're getting a lot of call-ins. We want more trees. I hope you're going to do a tree giveaway again. I have a cottonwood, or I have a desert willow, or I have an ash tree, or a conifer, and people are telling us that not only are they getting 1 to 2 feet per year of growth, but the trees are very healthy and doing really well. So we do offer follow-up education and a call-in line, both in the city and at Tree New Mexico, for people to be able to call in with questions or if they're having problems. And what we also look at this and is that the trees are not that costly, and it's a really good way to get people educated and more interested in trees and getting good information out there, and an opportunity to connect with people in the community when we need help in terms of advocacy for tree ordinances or more budget money for parks or that sort of thing. So we're finding it to be beneficial both in the short and the long term. Next slide, please. The reason I put this in here is we have 2 pictures here. One I like to call kid-friendly or volunteer-friendly trees. And when we're doing tree planting projects and programs with neighborhood associations and other nonprofit groups or at schools, it really is very difficult to be able to find the funding to fund large trees in these kinds of projects. And the volunteers and the kids just don't get enough hands-on work to do, and they really like getting in there and digging those holes and getting the trees in. So we make sure that we have plenty of people on site to be able to work with the volunteers almost on a one-to-one and really teach them how to properly dig that hole, and it's out, not down so much, and get it at the right height and looking for the root flare and all of that. And it's a great way to educate people while they're actually getting a project done. We also do a lot of tree plantings using volunteers and offering that opportunity for citizens in the community to participate in parks where tree spades are used, and the Parks Department and the city foresters can also do that same kind of instruction. It's just that there isn't as much hands-on activity. It's usually a lot more watching, the tree spade work and the trees being taken off the truck. So there's value in both, and we definitely offer both to the public. And it gives us an opportunity also to talk about tree stock, about native versus non-native trees, and why we need healthy, diverse urban forests, and not just planting one or the other here in the state. Next slide, please. This is actually one of our, Leland and Jared, I'm sorry I didn't have a banner out here on this one, but this was a great shot of one of our neighborhoods tree plantings in low-income areas in town that are targeted, and using some of the youth groups and kids actually from this community that lived in the surrounding houses, as you see. The gentleman in the middle is one of our retired urban state foresters, Jim Freeman. So when we are working with volunteers and kids in the community, we do make sure that we have good expertise on site at every location. Say that we had 5 or 6 groups scattered throughout the neighborhood doing this, we would make sure that we had someone available. Even though we do a pre-training with the volunteers, we want to make sure that when the trees are actually going in the ground that the steps are taken properly. When we do this also, we ask that the volunteers work house to house and work with the homeowner as well to make sure that they understand the follow-up maintenance that needs to be done, and that they have the proper information and the call-in numbers if something happens. We actually do go out and make site visits, and we have trained volunteers that we can call on in that neighborhood to actually do the same thing and report back to us. Next slide, please. And really, no matter how you plant a tree, particularly out here, where we get 7 to 8 inches of annual rainfall a year, and we're right in the middle of our hottest week. It's been almost 100 every day this week. That if you do not have mulch on your trees, particularly the newly planted trees, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So we do spend a lot of time on mulch and making sure that they have the right depth, that they're not crowding the mulch up to the stem of the tree, and that we're using a high quality mulch that actually provides nutrients to the soils as well. We have very poor soils here, so it's important not only for cooling the roots and for water transpiration, but also it helps with nutrients. So with that, I will turn it back over to Leland for questions.
All right, thanks, Sue. The operator can open the line up for questions.
Again, it's *1, and please record your name if you'd like to ask a question.
All right, while people are queuing up, I wanted to ask you first, Sue. I know that native stock is planting native stock is a major focus of Tree New Mexico's, and you just talked about the poor soil quality in the area. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of native stock in your programming.
Well, Leland, in particular, we have to make sure that we're using native stock, and we strive to use local genetic seed sources in that as well, particularly in our riparian areas and, of course, in reforestation. It is a trick to educate the public about the need for keeping this area, these 2,500 acres, from having non-native and invasives encroach into the Boston area. However, then we have to reverse what we say when we're talking about urban tree plantings and why we need to go beyond native trees and use a broader palette so that we have a healthier and more diverse urban forest. And it's taken a while, but over the last 5 or 6 years, we have a really, really good tree planting palette now of trees that work well here, work with our soils, but provide that diversity that we need to maintain a healthy urban forest rather than just natives. Really, in this part of the country, most often there are very, very few native trees that actually ever grew in what you would call an urban environment. This is all man-made, so we have to educate on both planes, both why the need for using native trees in protected areas like the bosque, and then reversing that and going to what really makes up a healthy urban forest, and why the tree planting is different, the stock is different, how you choose and how you plant the tree stock is very different in urban areas than it is in reforestation or in riparian, and we do all of it. So it takes a lot of really understanding your audience and exactly what message you're trying to get across.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions in the queue?
There is a question on the phones. It's from Tom Herc.
Go ahead, Tom.
Tom Herc, your line is open. Please check your mute button.
All right, well, while Tom's figuring that out, I have a question here that I think relates to both Jim and Sue's experience, and it's their advice minimizing street trees causing sidewalk heaving.
Well, I'll jump in on that one first. What we've had to look at here, because we have very, very small planting spaces on a lot of our streets and between our sidewalks and streets. Some of our sidewalks don't even have a space in between, and we're doing that horrible well and grade thing that we talked about. But when we have really, really small spaces like that, it really is about picking maybe a more medium-sized tree or a native tree that is not going to encroach in and cause a problem in those areas, and really looking and targeting where you can plant the bigger trees and making that a focus for that neighborhood.
And I would, in terms of getting rid of the tree grates or these smaller spaces, the city of New York has banned tree grates, and that's about as dense of an environment that I'm aware of. And they figured out lots of ways of putting actually fairly large trees in fairly small holes. But I do think you can engineer your way around that through various methodologies. If you've got, for example, in the southwest of the U.S., where we have very dry soils and fairly much deeper potential for water, it may be the tree, a root barrier, for example, which something has always been opposed to, might actually be effective. And there's some new work on root barriers that may make them more usable in some places. And you really have to do it on a site by site basis as to how to cram trees in holes. But I believe that the bottom line is that we really need to have canopy over our cities and over the buildings, over the streets, and if that means we have to put an overly big tree in a small space, if we can engineer our way around most of the conflicts, we'd be better to err on the side of too big a tree than making all the trees small so that we don't have conflicts.
All right, great, thank you. Is Tom there with a question?
Do you want to go on to the next question?
That'd be great, thank you.
There's another question from Don Kissinger.
Hello, Sue. You had shown a photo of a giveaway with seedling plugs or sapling plugs, and you'd mentioned that you got those from your state nursery. Did you have any repercussions from private nurseries in the state with having that happen?
Well, that's an interesting question. We try really hard not to compete with local retailers, and we've actually had several local nurseries that have helped support this project because it's about tree awareness, and a couple we've raffled off some larger trees during the tree giveaway from local nurseries. So we do have some support. and they know we're not competing with them. This is more really about educating and getting the public excited about trees. The people that are going to stand in line, it's amazing to me what people will do for a $1.50 tree is stand in line for 2 hours in the sun to get, one of these little D10s, plugs. But it's really about ownership in that tree and about getting them excited and getting, being able to hand them information. We have a list of nurseries that we support and we know have good tree stock. So we've had very little, if almost none. I think I had one complaint in 2 years and I know it was a nursery guy that called, and you could tell by the way he was talking, but most of them have been really supportive of our efforts in bringing tree awareness and the value of trees to the community. So it's kind of a weird turnaround, but it actually works.
Okay, good.
Are there any other questions on the phone?
There are no further questions from the phone.
All right, great. Well, I have another question from the web that I'd like to ask. It's, do ANSI standards identify root flare being at grade level when a tree is B&B'd? This is a question for Jim, I guess.
Yeah, and it's actually now the ANLA, ANSI is the ANSI Z60, I think, is actually an American Nursery and Landscape Association standard. And the current standard simply says that you must have structural roots within 3 inches of the top of the root ball, measured 4 inches from the tree. That's all the further they go. They're mute on the word trunk flare, and there's a whole discussion in the industry right now as to whether a nursery stock tree actually even has a trunk flare, at a 3 or 4 inch caliper tree.
Okay. And one other question is again, this is about girdling. Is a question about if you've seen any evidence of girdling in the Silva cells.
We haven't had trees in Silva cells long enough, but there's nothing about the Silva cell design that I believe could create a girdling root on a tree. Although that's not to say it couldn't happen.
Okay, great.
And just technically, Jim, can you explain why B&B trees don't cause girdling?
Oh, they do. Those adventitious roots up in the trunk, that are up in that soft soil, that is put above the nursery is often full of girdling roots, and it's one of the big things I look for with my shovel when I'm digging in nurseries, and we've seen the B&B. The only difference between the B&B tree and the nursery tree is that usually the girdling roots are more fixable. They're fixable by the nursery, and they're also fixable at the site after the tree gets there. Although I'd rather have it fixed in the nursery.
All right. Are there any other questions on the queue?
There are no questions from the phones at this time.
All right. Well, I think that will wrap up our webcast session for today. I want to extend a big thank you to James Urban and Suzanne Probart for presenting on tree stock. And I want to thank everyone who attended. This presentation and Sue and Jim's presentations, as well as the recorded session and a resource list, will be available in about a week or two. We'll send out an email about that to you, but also please feel free to check our website. The next webcast session is Planning Your Way to the Best Urban Forest. That's going to be next month on August 20th. On the screen right now, you should see our closing slide, which has a website right there. That address is a link to a survey on this session. We'd really appreciate it if you would take 2 seconds to fill that out. I want to thank everyone for attending. Thanks again to Jim and Sue, to the Home Depot Foundation, and to the U.S. Forest Service for making this possible. We hope to see you all at our next webcast. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.